If you have your Bible, I want you to turn to the Old Testament book of Isaiah. We're going to start in chapter 8. And as Austin said, this morning we're kicking off our celebration of Christmas. And we're going to do so by doing a deep dive into a passage of Scripture from the Old Testament that sort of gives you the story before the story. Now, normally when it gets Christmas time, we turn our attention to the Gospels and we read about the wise men and the angels and even the shepherds. But today we're going to look at the story before the story. So if the gospel story of Christmas is like the movie, then this is like the prequel to the movie. This is the part that helps you make sense of what we're about to read in the weeks to come. So as we dig into this, you're going to discover it's the story before the story that helps you make sense of the story. Anybody confused yet with that? To understand what God was doing by sending His Son to the earth in the form of a helpless baby boy, you first have to understand the prophecy that's recorded in Isaiah chapters 8 and 9. So this was all written about 700 years before the birth of Jesus, when the Jewish people were divided into two competing kingdoms. Really important. So I've got a map that kind of shows this. To the south, you had the southern kingdom of Judah. North of them, you had what was called the kingdom of Israel. And then even further north, sort of off to the east there, you had this growing kingdom called the kingdom of Assyria. We sometimes call it the Assyrian Empire. In the Assyrian Empire, whenever you read about them in the Old Testament, it's kind of like you're reading about the Nazis. Like they had this insatiable desire to take over the world, and they almost did if you go back and read through the Old Testament. As we pick up the story in Isaiah chapter 8, it's really important to understand that the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Damascus, which is right to the north of them, have joined together and they have attacked the kingdom of Judah to the south. And the reason they did that is because they were feeling the pressure from the kingdom of Assyria. They knew that the Assyrians were getting ready to attack them. And so they joined together and they went to the king of Judah, a guy named Ahaz, and they said, we want you to join in with us and we'll form sort of this military alliance. You might think of it kind of like NATO or some sort of military coalition, and that way we'll fight back against the Assyrians. But Ahaz decided he wasn't interested in joining that battle, and so in order to force his hand or maybe to replace him with somebody that might be willing to join their alliance, they attacked Judah. It's then that Ahaz does something that at the moment, I'm sure he thought it was a great idea, but it turned out to be a disaster. Like, you ever done that? You ever thought, well, this is going to be awesome, and then you do something, you think, I can't believe, I thought this was a good idea. I read a story this week, you may have seen this on the news, about a guy in Weston, Connecticut. He invited 40 members of his extended family over for Thanksgiving. It's the first time he'd ever hosted. He had this waterfront mansion, and he thought, this is going to be great. We can all celebrate together. The problem was he tried to deep fry a turkey for the first time, and he caught his house on fire. I've got a picture that shows you. This is what it looked like 2 hours after the fire ignited. I've got another one that shows you what it looked like 16 hours later. When the firefighters finally abandoned the scene. He told the homeowner, told a local reporter, he said, I just wanted to do something memorable for my family. And I guess I did. I guess that's kind of what happens sometimes. But Ahaz, it's very similar to what happens to him. Ahaz has this moment, and he decides that rather than joining up with the kingdom of Damascus and the kingdom of Israel, that he is going to join up with the king of Assyria. And so he joins up with who he thinks is the most powerful, thinking that they will protect him, only to have the kingdom of Assyria eventually turn on him and wreak havoc throughout his entire kingdom. So rather than trusting God to protect his people, he made a strategic decision to align himself with God's enemies. And of course, it blew up in his face. And so by the time you get to the end of Isaiah chapter 8, the people of Judah and their ruler Ahaz have plunged themselves so far into the darkness that it feels like all hope is lost because of their refusal to trust God. And by this point, it's almost as if their entire kingdom has burned down around them. Now, I want you to look at how Isaiah describes this. The end of Isaiah chapter 8, starting in verse 19. He says, when someone tells you to consult mediums and spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? Consult God's instruction and the testimony of warning. If anyone does not speak according to this word, they have no light of dawn. Distressed and hungry, they will roam through the land when they are famished. They will become enraged, and looking upward, they will curse their king and their God. Then they will look toward the earth and see only distress and darkness and fearful gloom, and they will be thrust into utter darkness. So he says, this is what's going to happen, is it's going to get really bad, and then it's going to get a whole lot worse. And he says that the people they're going to be starving, they're going to be spiritually empty. He said it'll be like this whole sense of gloom has just set in everywhere. It'll be everything they hear will be bad. It'll just be more bad news stacked on top of other bad news. And at the end of it, it's like they're so far out in the darkness that they can't even see the light, much less hear from God. It's a picture of what it looks like when an entire culture collapses. This sense of fearful gloom is just settled in, and there's really no sense of hope. You ever felt like that? You ever felt like you were engulfed in a dark cloud? Happens a lot this time of year. For some of you, it might be an ongoing bout with seasonal depression. You know, it's getting colder and the days are getting darker, and it's all you can do to just sort of keep going. For some people, it's the stress of the finances this time of year. You know, you want to do your best to make it a good Christmas for everybody, but the cards are maxed out and the bank account is empty, and you're trying to do the math in your head, and you don't see how it's going to work. For some people, especially this time of year, it's the strain of these tense family relationships. Some of you remember the old song from the 1960s, Andy Williams, "It's the most wonderful time of the year." And you hear that and you think, you know, if Andy Williams had to go where I have to go and hang out with who I have to hang out with, he might have been singing a different song. Sometimes it's like that. For others, it might be the uncertainty of a recent diagnosis. You thought everything was going well, and then you got blindsided with something. For a lot of us, what's supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year can often feel pretty gloomy. And for the people living in the kingdom of Judah, 700 years before Jesus' birth, it was a time of utter darkness. Isaiah says they've been thrust so far out in the darkness, they can't even recognize the light. Their kingdom has collapsed. Their enemies have won. Everything is bad. It's almost as if they're on the verge of being completely destroyed. But then when you transition from chapter 8 into chapter 9, you catch just the first glimmer of hope. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1 says like this, "Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan." Now, because of the geography of Israel, Zebulun and Naphtali were the two most northern tribes. And if you were going to attack Israel, that's really the only way you could go because of the geography. And so if you've seen any of those images like in Ukraine, the Ukrainian cities that share a border with Russia, that's kind of what it was like for Zebulun and Naphtali. They were just always being just pounded by their enemies. And yet as bad as it was, Isaiah says there's this promise from God that at some point there'll be no more gloom. Like it's going to move from darkness to light. And all the people who are in distress are going to experience something that's going to change everything. Look at verse 2. He says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned." Did you know that you can learn to walk in darkness? I was thinking about this over Thanksgiving. So at the end of this year, I will now have lived in Monticello longer than I lived anywhere else. So I've been here almost 14 years, and since I'm 25, you kind of do the math on that. It's a big percentage of the, not quite, but you get it. You get the point. And so I've lived in the same house all that time, and so because of that, I can navigate my house in the dark, and I bet you can too. Like I can walk through, I know where the doorways are, I know where the furniture is, I know where the refrigerator is, you know what I mean? Like, you know how it works, you turn out all the lights, and you try to sneak in that one last bowl of ice cream, everybody else has gone to bed, so you're in there trying to find the door. And I bet you could do the same thing. If you wanted to, like you could probably, somebody could blindfold you, start you at your front door, and you could sort of navigate your way through the house, and you might bump into something, you might stub your toe, you know, if your kids are like my kids, there might be, you know, 5,000 balls laying around, but you can pretty much find your way. And here's the thing, if you want to, you can train yourself to walk in darkness. That's what the people in Judah were doing. It's also what a lot of us have spent our lives doing. It's then, though, that Isaiah says at this unexpected moment, there's going to be this great light that dawns on people who have grown comfortable walking in darkness. And the way it's written in Hebrew indicates that this is a sudden flash of light. This is not like a sunrise that slowly comes up. This is like a bomb that goes off. And you see everything is different in the light that's just sort of flashed across the sky. And what's really cool about this is that from verse 3 until the end of the passage, Isaiah switches tenses. It's hard to pick up in English, but in Hebrew, he moves to what's called the perfect tense. We would call it the past tense. And so he's looking forward to something that hasn't yet happened, but he's describing it in terms as if it already had. It's like he's remembering something that hasn't yet happened. That's a sign that he is so confident that God is going to fulfill his promise that when he looks off into the future, he can see the results of something that hasn't yet happened. And he says, when this light dawns, when this light flashes, it's going to change everything for God's people. And so as you keep digging through this passage, there's lots of different implications, but there's three big ones he sort of brings to the forefront. But the biggest thing you have to understand about this light is that as he goes on and describes it, he goes on and he describes this light that's going to dawn not as a thing, but as a person. Most time you think of light like as a thing, right? It's some kind of scientific, thing. But he describes it in terms of being a person. So here's the big idea for the message as we jump into this passage, is that the light, according to the prophet Isaiah, the light is not a what, but rather it's a who. And that changes the way you understand it. Like, here's the deal. Most of the time, you think about, when you think about something that will improve your situation, something that will make you, less gloomy, something that will take you out of distress, most of us tend to think in terms of a what. Or maybe a whole series of whats. We took our boys to see Santa yesterday, and Jack was giving Santa his list, and it kept getting longer and longer. And sometimes that's the way it is. Like you think, if I just had this. Now, for the people in Judah, for them, it was a stronger military. If we had a stronger military that could repel the Assyrians, then we'd be out of distress. For you, it could be anything. It could be if I just had more money, that would relieve a whole lot of pressure. If I just had a better job, I'd feel more hopeful about the future. If I just had a bigger house in a better neighborhood, then I'd finally be satisfied. If I just had more land, if I just had more stuff. I mean, everybody's got their list of what's, and they think, if I just had these things, then my life would be better and I'd feel more hopeful. But Isaiah comes in and he says that what we need most is not a what, and it's not even a whole list of what's, it's a who. He hinted at the same thing. If you go back to Isaiah chapter 7, he hinted at the same thing in Isaiah 7:14 when he said, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. And again, we usually only see that at Christmas. You see it on Christmas cards. You hear it at church. And we've heard it so much, though, that we miss what he's saying. The word Emmanuel, the name Emmanuel, literally means that God is with us. And so keep in mind who he's writing this to. He's writing this to people who feel as if they've been abandoned by God. Like nothing has turned out like they expected. Nothing looks like they expected it to look. Everything is bad. It's getting worse. And right at that moment, Isaiah comes in and says, but at some point in the future, God is going to be with you in a way that you can't even wrap your mind around at present. Like for them, that was the dream. They felt completely separated from God. And yet he promises that at some point in the future, God is going to show up and he's going to rescue you, not with a what, but with a who. And then he goes on and he describes three things about what this person is going to do. Here's the first one. He says, this light, this who, is going to bring victory from defeat. Check out verse 3 of Isaiah chapter 9. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, every warrior's boot used in battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. Again, at this point, they're reading this, they're on the wrong end of a bitter defeat. Everything is bad. Their nation has been stolen from them. And yet Isaiah says that when this light appears, it's going to be like this great reversal. Instead of losing territory, their nation will be enlarged. Instead of tears of sadness, it'll be tears of joy. Instead of gearing up for another unwinnable battle, they'll be able to burn their weapons because their victory in the previous battle will have been so complete there won't be any need to fight another one. In the present, this was the kind of thing like they could only dream of. But Isaiah said at some point in the future, this light is going to come, and when he does, he's going to bring victory from what looks like a bitter defeat. Now, I know it's been basketball season here in Kentucky for several weeks, but last Saturday in college football was what they called Rivalry Saturday. All day long, you had the different teams playing against their most bitter rival. I got a picture I want to show you. The premier game, at least early in the day, was the Michigan Wolverines against the Ohio State Buckeyes. Kind of game you hope both teams lose. You know what I'm saying? Like you're watching, you think, I just hope both teams somehow lose this game. If you're an Ohio State fan, kind of sorry, but don't worry about it. When the game was over, though, Michigan, 3-touchdown underdog, somehow pulled out this incredible victory, 3-point victory. And when it was over, you can see the picture. The players took this huge Michigan flag, and they tried to plant it in the middle of Ohio State's home field, which, of course, started a huge fight. The police got involved. Players from both teams actually got pepper sprayed, which I thought was great. Like, if they both can't lose, at least they both got pepper sprayed. And if you watch the rest of the day, there were, like, other teams that tried to do the same thing. Like, you beat your rival, and you take the flag, and they try to plant the flag, and it was always this huge fight. And there was, like, 4 or 5 huge fights during the day. But throughout history, a planted flag indicates that the land has been conquered and is now under the kingdom of the rulership of a new kingdom, right? And so that's kind of this picture that Isaiah is painting. So I know it looks bad right now, but at some point in the future, like the king's going to come, this light's going to arrive, the Assyrians are going to be pushed out, the Israelites are going to be pushed out, and God himself is going to plant his flag, and this entire nation will be under the leadership of a new king. It'll be adopted into a new kingship. And so the flag becomes a symbol that there's a new king that's now ruling the earth who brings victory from defeat. Second thing that he talks about in this passage is that this light will also give direction to the directionless. Get to verse 6 and look what he says. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So who is this light that Isaiah keeps talking about? Remember, he describes him in terms of being a person, and he tells us that there's something unique about him in that he's a man, meaning he's fully human, but he's also God. And it's hard to wrap your mind around. That's kind of the the mystery of Christmas. But the reason you know that's true is because of these four names that he applies to him. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. And each of those titles tell us something, not just about his identity, but about his character. For example, the phrase wonderful counselor. Wonderful was a word that the Hebrews only applied to God. But then he says this person is going to be a godlike counselor. And you say, what in the world does that mean? Well, I want you to listen to these words from Tim Keller. He said, why is he called a counselor? He said, when you're going through something difficult, it's good to talk to someone who's walked the same path, who knows personally what you've been through. If God has really been born in a manger, then we have something that no other religion even claims to have. It's a God who truly understands you from the inside of your experience. He's God, but he's man. He goes on. There's no other religion that says that God has suffered, that God had to be courageous, that he knows what it's like to be abandoned by friends, to be crushed by injustice, to be tortured and die. Christmas shows he knows what you're going through, and when you talk to him, he understands. So yes, he's God. He's also man, which is good news. That means he not only understands what it is you might be going through, he also has the power to do something about it. It's one thing to just sort of understand. It's one thing to show empathy. But because of who he is, he has the power to change your circumstances. He has the power to give direction to those who desperately need it. When you fast forward to the New Testament, John chapter 8, there's this debate that goes on. It's these religious leaders, and they're debating about who Jesus is. It's the same debate that's still happening now. In fact, if you watch like the History Channel or CBS over the next couple of weeks, you're going to see all kinds of television specials in which people are still having this same debate. But you get to this point in the debate, and Jesus interrupts, and he acknowledges who he is by identifying himself as the great light that Isaiah talked about in Isaiah chapter 9. John 8 verse 12 says, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. One of the things that light always does is it provides a sense of direction. That's why when you walk into a dark room, most of the time the first thing you do is you feel for the light switch. Or maybe you pull out the flashlight on your phone. Now everybody knows, like if you get familiar enough, of course you can navigate your way through a dark room. But it's so much better if you have the light to show you the path. And that's exactly what Jesus promises to do. He said, you can spend your life stumbling around in the darkness, and a lot of people do, or you can step into the light of who he is and allow him to show you where he wants you to go. That leads to the last thing that you see in this passage. He also gives hope to the hopeless. Look at the way Isaiah finishes this part in verse 7. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Remember, he's writing this to people who are in the worst possible situation. I mean, it would be hard to imagine a scenario worse than what they were experiencing. What Ahaz was sure was going to be the salvation of his kingdom had blown up in his face, and now all hope was lost. And maybe you feel the same way. I know for a lot of people, this time of year is really hard. And maybe for you, just like the people of Judah, you feel boxed in. The pressure's mounting. Every day is a little harder than the day before. The family relationships are near breaking. The boss is breathing down your neck. The finances are in such disarray. You're not even sure how much money you have left. I mean, it can be one thing after another this time of year. And that's where they were. Just a minute ago, we sang the song Rock sang Weary Traveler. And the thing that's interesting about that song is it's kind of a downer. And here's what I mean by that. The whole first couple verses are like negative. You know what I mean? But the reason it's so popular is because it resonates with so many people. Listen to the first line. It says, "Weary traveler, beat down from the storms that you have weathered, feels like this road might go on forever." Not real encouraging, but pretty accurate. Some of you get up every day and it feels like you're on a road that's just going to go on forever. The second verse of the song, not much better. It says, "You keep on giving, but every day the world keeps on taking. Your tired heart is on the edge of breaking." You ever felt like that? Henry David Thoreau, the great writer, said, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Like our hearts are always on the edge of breaking." But then you get to that third part of the song, and there's actually a glimmer of hope that shines through in the darkness. It says, "Weary traveler, restless soul, you were never meant to walk this road alone. It'll all be worth it, so just hold on. When Jesus calls, we'll lay down all our heavy burdens." And that's really the promise of Isaiah chapter 9. Yes, it may look bad. You may feel overwhelmed. You may be overmatched. It may feel like your life is coming apart at the seams. It may feel like you're engulfed in a darkness that you can't seem to escape. All of that may be true. But even more than that, because of who Jesus is and because of what Jesus has done, you have the promise that He will make all things right. Of the increase of His government, there will be no end. And then you get to the end, He says, "The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." You know what that means? That means that the promise of Christmas is not contingent on your performance. It doesn't matter what you do to turn it around because you're incapable of turning around. It's based entirely on who Jesus is and what He came to do. And the promise of Isaiah chapter 9 is that whatever He came to do, He's already doing. He's doing it now. That's why a little more than 700 years later, the Apostle John said it like this. He said, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." I've got one last picture I want to show you. This is a picture of a salt mine down in Bolivia in South America. It's a picture taken by an astrophysicist and a photographer named Jordan Bousquet. It's kind of an odd combination, astrophysicist and a photographer. He travels all over the world looking for the world's darkest places. He's kind of obsessed as an astrophysicist with stars and constellations. And so he finds places that he says have been free from light pollution. So there's no artificial light, it's all natural. And then sometimes he'll camp out for as much to a week trying to capture these perfect images of these stars. If you Google him, you'll see he's very famous for this. In an interview with the BBC just a few weeks ago, he was asked, why does he do this? I mean, why do you have to go take pictures of something and put yourself in all these exotic locations and places that are awfully uncomfortable? And I want you to listen to what he said. He said, it's only when you're in a truly dark place that you can see the light. It's only when you're in a truly dark place that you can see light. So the truth is, a lot of us have spent our lives sort of filling them up with what he would call light pollution, artificial light. We got all these watts, and I got this watt last year, and if I have this watt this year, maybe the other watt next year, maybe I'll finally be happy. And we discovered that all of those watts are just a cheap substitute for the who that we were created for. And so we keep chasing after all these things, missing out on the person who's there who offers what we really need. And what is it that we need? We need somebody to bring victory from defeat. We need somebody to give direction when we feel directionless. We need somebody who gives hope to hopeless. We need somebody who brings energy to the exhausted. We need somebody that brings a sense of calm to the anxious, acceptance to those who've been rejected, friendship to the lonely, comfort to the brokenhearted, reconciliation to the divided, and wholeness to the broken. And who is that? He's the one who brings grace to the undeserving, love to those who feel like they're unlovable, forgiveness to the guilty, salvation to the lost, and maybe the best of all is that he brings life to those who were dead. And what's so great about this is that this news, this thing, this birth that Isaiah was so desperate to experience, which for him was in the future, for us is in the past. What for him was a prophecy about something that was going to happen, for us is the hinge point of history. So what he was looking forward to, we gather to remember. That's why in Luke chapter 1, the famous Christmas passage, the angel says, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord." And when you realize the story before the story, it changes how you understand the story. I want you to stand with me. We're going to sing a couple closing songs here. We call this an invitation. It's an invitation for anybody that needs to make a public decision to follow Christ. Maybe you're here and you think, I've never really taken that step. Maybe you've never been baptized into Christ. Maybe you've never confessed Christ publicly. We'd love to help you. David's here. Austin's here. We'd be glad to walk you through that process. Others of you maybe it's pretty gloomy and you just want to pray with somebody. We'd be glad to do that. Maybe you're here and you're ready to join the team here at FCC. You feel like this is the place the Lord has called you to put down your roots. If you're a baptized believer, it's a very simple process, and we'd be honored to welcome you to the team. But what I want you to remember most is that as we enter into this Christmas season, what they were looking forward to, we can look back at, which means we have an opportunity to experience what they could only dream about. And when you understand that, it changes everything. But like any gift, you have to accept it. You have to receive it. So if you need help doing that, we'd ask you to step out of your seat and meet us on this front row.